What happens when unchecked arrogance meets quiet, unimaginable power? Picture boarding a luxury flight exhausted only to have your first-class ticket literally ripped to shreds by a flight attendant who took one look at your skin and decided you didn't belong. Maya experienced exactly that. She didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She just let the woman dig her own professional grave. Because what that attendant didn't know was that Maya's father didn't just fly first class, he owned the entire airline. Rain lashed against the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4. It was a bleak, unforgiving Tuesday morning in New York, the kind of day that set everyone on edge. Maya Maxwell, however, felt a profound sense of relief. At 22, she had just wrapped up a grueling final semester at Yale University. All she wanted was to board Crown Airways Flight 802 to London Heathrow, slip on her noise-canceling headphones, and sleep for the next 7 hours. Maya deliberately dressed for comfort rather than status. She wore a faded gray oversized university hoodie, black Lululemon leggings, and a pair of scuffed white Converse. Her thick natural curls were pulled up into a messy bun. The only hints of her actual background were the subtle unbranded Goyard tote slung over her shoulder and the vintage Cartier tank watch hidden beneath her hoodie's cuff. She preferred it this way. Being the daughter of David Maxwell, a notoriously private billionaire venture capitalist who had quietly acquired a controlling 80% stake in Crown Airways just 3 months prior, often drew the wrong kind of attention. Her father's acquisition was so recent and so heavily shielded by non-disclosure agreements and corporate shell companies like Maxwell Holdings LLC that virtually no frontline employees knew the airline had a new owner. David was currently in London waiting for his daughter to arrive so they could attend a private board meeting to restructure the failing airline. Maya was flying commercial rather than taking the family's Gulfstream specifically at her father's request. See how they treat the customers when they think nobody important is watching. David had told her over the phone the night before. That will tell us exactly who needs to be fired. Maya approached Gate B22. The boarding area was chaotic, a swarming mass of frustrated passengers dealing with a 30-minute weather delay. At the priority lane, an older flight attendant stood with her arms crossed, sharply observing the boarding process. Her name tag read, Cynthia. Cynthia Higgins was a 25-year veteran of the skies, a woman whose initial passion for aviation had long since curdled into bitter resentment. Decades of dealing with demanding passengers coupled with recent company-wide pay freezes had left her deeply cynical. Over time, Cynthia had developed a rigid, prejudiced internal hierarchy of who belonged in her first-class cabin and who didn't. To Cynthia, first class was a sanctuary for CEOs in tailored Zegna suits, wealthy heiresses carrying Hermes Birkins and Hollywood elite. When Cynthia's sharp, critical eyes landed on Maya approaching the red carpet of the priority first-class boarding lane, her jaw tightened. She saw a young black woman in a worn-out sweatshirt and sneakers holding a crumpled physical boarding pass she had printed at the kiosk. In Cynthia's biased mind, the math didn't add up. Maya stepped up to the automated scanner. The gate agent, a tired young man named Toby, didn't even look up as Maya placed her pass on the glass. The machine let out a pleasant high-pitched ding, and the screen flashed bright green, Seat 2A, First Class, Priority Boarding. "Have a good flight," Toby mumbled routinely. Maya smiled politely. "Thank you." As she walked past the desk and toward the jet bridge entrance, Cynthia abruptly stepped directly into her path, her high heels clicking sharply against the linoleum. She blocked the narrow walkway, her posture stiff, a patronizing, razor-thin smile painted on her face. "Excuse me, honey," Cynthia said, her voice dripping with condescension. The word honey felt like a slap. "I think you're in the wrong lane. This is Group 1, first class only. Main cabin boarding hasn't been called yet. You need to step back and wait in the seating area." Maya paused, slightly taken aback by the sudden barrier. She looked at Cynthia, noting the rigid posture and the dismissive glare in the older woman's eyes. Maya held up her boarding pass. "I am in Group 1, Seat 2A. Cynthia didn't even look at the piece of paper. Instead, she looked Maya up and down, taking in the hoodie and the Converse, her expression souring further. I highly doubt that. There's been a lot of gate confusion today. Passengers trying to sneak ahead of their zones. Let me see your economy ticket, please. I need to direct you to the right zone. It's not an economy ticket, Maya said, her voice remaining steady and calm, though her heart began to beat a little faster. She extended the pass closer to Cynthia. The scanner already cleared me. You can see it right here. Cynthia snatched the boarding pass from Maya's hand with unnecessary force. She squinted at the paper, her heavily manicured thumb brushing over the bold 2AE. For a split second, confusion flashed across her face, quickly replaced by deep suspicion. How did you get this? Cynthia demanded, her tone dropping its faux politeness. Did you use miles? Or is this a buddy pass from a staff member? Because if you're flying on a non-rev staff ticket, you are required to adhere to a strict dress code. Sweats are absolutely prohibited in the premium cabin. I paid for it, Maya replied quietly, feeling the eyes of the other passengers in line beginning to stare. It's a full fare revenue ticket. I'm not a staff member. Cynthia's eyes narrowed. The idea that this young woman could drop $12,000 on a one-way transatlantic suite was completely unfathomable to her. Wait here, Cynthia commanded sharply. She turned and marched over to Toby at the gate desk. Maya watched as Cynthia aggressively tapped on the computer monitor, pointing at the screen and whispering furiously to the gate agent. Toby looked visibly uncomfortable typing on his keyboard and shaking his head. Maya could read Toby's lips. It's a valid ticket, Cynthia, paid in full. Leave it alone. Cynthia scowled, visibly displeased that the system hadn't validated her prejudice. She marched back to Maya, shoving the boarding pass back into her hand. Fine, Cynthia snapped, her voice tight. But I will be watching you. We don't tolerate any disruptive behavior in the premium cabin. Keep your voice down and don't bother the other guests. Maya felt a hot flush of anger rise in her chest, but she took a deep breath, channeling her father's legendary composure. She didn't say a word. She simply took her ticket, offered Cynthia a cool, unblinking stare, and walked down the jet bridge. The test had officially begun, and Cynthia was already failing miserably. The interior of the Boeing 777-300ER was a stark contrast to the dreary weather outside. Crown Airways' first-class cabin featured 8 enclosed private suites, heavily accented with dark walnut wood, brushed gold fixtures, and soft ambient mood lighting. Maya found Suite 2A on the left side of the aircraft. She stowed her Goyard tote under the ottoman, sank into the plush leather seat, and exhaled a long breath. She hated confrontation. She pulled out her phone to send a quick text to her father, boarded. The service is interesting so far. Before she could hit send, the heavy curtain at the front of the cabin was yanked open. Cynthia marched into the first-class section. She began her pre-flight rounds, offering hot towels and menus. Maya watched silently as Cynthia's demeanor transformed entirely when she interacted with the other passengers. To the older, wealthy-looking white man in Suite 1A, a renowned hedge fund manager named Harrison, Cynthia was entirely deferential. Mr. Sterling, so wonderful to have you back with us. May I pour you a glass of the 2008 Dom Perignon before takeoff? Thank you, Cynthia, Harrison replied warmly. Cynthia moved down the aisle, offering the same obsequious smiles and premium champagne to the middle-aged couple in row 3. Then she arrived at Suite 2A. The warm, accommodating smile instantly vanished from her face, replaced by a hard, flat stare. She didn't offer Maya a hot towel. She didn't offer her a menu. She certainly didn't offer her champagne. I need to see your ID and your boarding pass again, Cynthia demanded, her voice loud enough that Harrison in 1A glanced over his shoulder. Maya slowly lowered her phone. You just checked my boarding pass at the gate 3 minutes ago. And now I'm checking it on the aircraft, Cynthia shot back, leaning into the suite's personal space. Company policy dictates we verify the identities of passengers in our premium suites, especially when there are discrepancies. What discrepancy? Maya asked, keeping her voice incredibly soft. She knew that if she raised her voice even a fraction of a decibel, Cynthia would weaponize it against her, painting her as the angry, aggressive passenger. The Sipiti. The system occasionally glitches, Cynthia said, crossing her arms over her uniform vest. It upgrades people who aren't eligible, or it processes fraudulent credit cards. Given your lack of luggage and inappropriate attire for this cabin, I have reason to believe there's been a mistake. ID now. Maya reached into her pocket, pulled out her New York driver's license, and handed it over, along with the paper boarding pass. Cynthia snatched them. She scrutinized the ID, holding it up to the overhead reading light, as if checking for a fake watermark. She looked from the ID picture to Maya, her lips pursed in disdain. Maya Maxwell. Cynthia read aloud, her tone mocking. Well, Maya, the name matches the ticket, but that doesn't explain how a college student is sitting in a $12,000 suite. Did you find this ticket online through a third-party scam site, or did someone else buy this for you? The sheer audacity of the question hung heavy in the cabin air. The implication was clear, deeply offensive, and laced with undeniable prejudice. Maya felt the sting of it, but instead of blowing up, her analytical mind took over. She was cataloging every single violation of company policy, every microaggression. Who purchased my ticket is entirely irrelevant to you, ma'am, Maya said smoothly, maintaining direct eye contact. The ticket is valid. The gate agent confirmed it. I am in my assigned seat. Now I would appreciate it if you would return my identification and let me settle in for the flight. Cynthia's face turned a mottled shade of red. She was not used to being challenged, especially not by someone she deemed so profoundly beneath her. In Cynthia's world, she was the captain of the cabin, the ultimate authority. You don't tell me what is irrelevant? Cynthia hissed, leaning closer, her voice vibrating with suppressed rage. I have the authority to remove anyone from this aircraft who I feel is a security risk or who has obtained boarding under false pretenses. I know exactly what you're doing. You think you can game the system dress like a street urchin and demand luxury service? Harrison, the hedge fund manager, in 1A, cleared his throat loudly. Excuse me, flight attendant, is there a problem here? The young lady seems to be minding her own business. Cynthia whipped her head around instantly, softening her features for the wealthy man. No problem at all, Mr. Sterling. Just a minor ticketing error I'm sorting out. Apologies for the disturbance. She turned back to Maya, the venom returning to her eyes. She leaned in so close Maya could smell the stale coffee on her breath. Grab your bag, Cynthia ordered in a harsh whisper. I'm not going to let you sit here and make my actual premium guests uncomfortable. There is an empty middle seat in row 34 right by the aft lavatories. You're going to take your bag and march yourself back there right now, or I am calling Port Authority to drag you off. Maya didn't move a muscle. I'm not moving to row 34. I paid for suite 2A. If you have an issue, I suggest you call the captain. The captain is busy flying the plane. Cynthia snapped, her patience completely evaporating. I am the purser. My word is final. Move, now. The tension in the first-class cabin was now thick enough to cut with a knife. The other 6 passengers had ceased their pre-flight conversations and were openly watching the standoff in Suite 2A. Maya remained seated, her hands resting calmly on her lap. Her silence infuriated Cynthia more than any shouting ever could. It was an unyielding, confident silence that Cynthia couldn't comprehend or intimidate. I said, get up! Cynthia repeated, her voice cracking slightly as her anger reached a boiling point. She reached into the suite and aggressively grabbed the handle of Maya's Goyard tote, trying to yank it out from under the footrest. Do not touch my property! Maya said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying a sudden sharp authority that made Cynthia freeze for a fraction of a second. It was the exact tone David Maxwell used right before he fired an executive. Cynthia let go of the bag, her face contorting with fury. She looked at the paper boarding pass still clutched in her left hand. She looked down at Maya, who was looking back up at her with an expression of complete and utter pity. You think you're so smart, Cynthia sneered, her professionalism completely abandoned. You think you can just flash a glitchy ticket and disrespect my authority on my aircraft. I've been flying for 25 years. I know a fraud when I see one. With a swift, violent motion, Cynthia gripped the top and bottom of Maya's boarding pass. Ripe. The sound echoed loudly in the quiet, carpeted cabin. Cynthia tore the heavy cardstock perfectly in half, Not satisfied, she stacked the two halves and tore them again, letting the four shredded pieces flutter down onto Maya's lap. A collective gasp echoed from the surrounding suites. Harrison in 1A half stood from his seat, his eyes wide with shock. "What on earth are you doing?" he demanded. "I am securing the cabin," Cynthia announced loudly to the room, though her hands were visibly shaking from the adrenaline. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at Maya's face. "Your ticket is void. You're no longer a passenger on this flight. You're trespassing." Maya looked down at the shredded pieces of paper resting on her Yale hoodie. She carefully picked them up, piece by piece, and set them on the small side console of her suite. She didn't look scared. She looked profoundly disappointed. "Did you really just destroy my property?" Maya asked quietly. "I voided a fraudulent document," Cynthia countered, though a tiny sliver of doubt finally began to creep into her mind as she registered Maya's unnatural calm. Any normal person would be screaming, crying, or begging by now. Maya was simply observing her. Cynthia reached for the intercom phone mounted on the galley bulkhead. She punched in a code, her eyes locked menacingly on Maya. "Flight deck, this is Cynthia. We have a code 3 in first class. Unruly passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions, suspected ticket fraud. I need ground security to board immediately and remove her. Yes, Suite 2A. She slammed the phone back into its cradle and turned to Maya with a victorious smirk. "Port authority is on their way. You're going to leave this plane in handcuffs." Maya finally reached for her phone. She didn't call the police. She didn't start recording a TikTok video like Cynthia expected. She simply opened her messages, tapped on her father's contact name, and began to type. "Dad, Flight 802. Purser named Cynthia just physically destroyed my boarding pass and called airport police to arrest me because I don't look like I belong in first class. Thought you should know before the security team gets here." She hit send. The message showed delivered, and a second later, read. "Texting your little friends isn't going to save you," Cynthia mocked, standing guard at the edge of the suite to ensure Maya didn't try to run. "I'm not texting a friend," Maya replied finally, allowing a small cold smile to touch her lips. "I'm texting the man who writes your pension checks." Cynthia let out a loud, harsh laugh. "Oh, please. What your daddy is the CEO of the airport, save the theatrics for the police." Less than 2 minutes later, heavy footsteps echoed down the jet bridge. 2 large, imposing Port Authority police officers stepped onto the aircraft, their tactical gear clinking. Behind them, the first officer of the flight, a tall, stern-looking pilot named Captain Thomas Mitchell, emerged from the cockpit looking alarmed. "What's the situation, Cynthia?" Captain Mitchell asked, his brow furrowed as he assessed the silent, tense cabin. "This woman," Cynthia said dramatically, pointing at Maya, "is flying on a fraudulent ticket, refused to show proper identification, became verbally abusive, and refused a direct order to relocate to her proper seat in economy. I want her removed and charged with interfering with a flight crew." The 2 police officers stepped up to Suite 2A, their hands resting cautiously near their belts. "Ma'am," the older officer said gruffly, "we're going to need you to gather your things and come with us." Maya didn't move. She held up her phone, the screen glowing brightly in the dim cabin. "Before I do that," Maya said, her voice ringing clear and authoritative through the cabin, "Captain Mitchell, I highly suggest you check your company ACARS messaging system. I believe your director of operations is trying to reach you." Captain Mitchell frowned, confused by the highly specific aviation terminology coming from a 22-year-old in a hoodie. Before he could speak, the distinct loud chime of the cockpit priority communication system echoed from the open flight deck door. The storm hadn't just arrived. It was about to completely destroy Cynthia Higgins' world. Captain Thomas Mitchell was a veteran aviator who had logged over 15,000 hours in commercial airspace, navigating everything from severe zero-visibility blizzards over the Atlantic to sudden mechanical failures at cruising altitude. He possessed an unnerving calm that made him an exceptional pilot. Yet the distinct rapid high-low chime erupting from the flight deck's aircraft communications addressing and reporting system, the ACARS, sent a cold, jagged spike of adrenaline straight down his spine. That specific auditory warning was not a routine weather update or a standard clearance delay. It was a Priority 1 dispatch, a direct override from the highest echelons of Crown Airways corporate headquarters. It meant something was catastrophically wrong. "Hold your positions!" Captain Mitchell barked sharply to the two Port Authority police officers. They both froze, their hands hovering inches from their utility belts, glancing between the pilot and the young woman sitting serenely in Suite 2A. "Captain, what are you doing?" Cynthia hissed, her voice vibrating with manic impatience. Her impeccably styled hair was beginning to fray slightly at the edges, mirroring her unraveling composure. "The passenger is non-compliant. She is a fraud and a security risk. You need to authorize her removal so we can close the main cabin doors and push back." "I said hold," Mitchell repeated, his voice brooking zero argument. He didn't look at Cynthia. His eyes were locked on Maya. The young woman hadn't flinched when the officers arrived. She hadn't raised her voice. She simply sat there, radiating an aura of absolute terrifying confidence. Mitchell turned on his heel and strode rapidly back into the cockpit. The first officer was already tearing a strip of thermal paper from the ACARS printer, his face drained of all color. He handed it to Mitchell without a word. Mitchell's eyes scanned the harsh capitalized text dotting the paper. Priority 1. Emergency dispatch, sender Arthur Pendleton, Chief Operating Officer, Crown Airways, HQ reflight 802/JFK-LHR/seat 2. Urgent instruction, Captain Mitchell, you are ordered to immediately halt any and all actions against the passenger. In Suite 2, Amaya Maxwell. Repeat, do not disembark passenger. Port Authority police are to stand down immediately. Passenger is confirmed as full fare revenue. Passenger is the daughter of David Maxwell, Chairman and majority owner of Maxwell Holdings and Crown Airways. Await incoming secure satellite call from Chairman Maxwell. Secure cabin. Retain purser Cynthia Higgins in first class until further notice. Mitchell felt his stomach drop out completely. He reread the dispatch twice, his mind struggling to process the sheer magnitude of the disaster unfolding 50 feet behind his pilot's chair. The owner's daughter. And his purser had just physically assaulted her property, accused her of fraud, and called armed police to drag her off the plane. It was a career-ending catastrophe. The legal liability alone was staggering. Mitchell grabbed his uniform jacket, his hands trembling slightly, and marched back out into the first-class cabin. The scene had remained frozen in a tense tableau. The other passengers were watching with bated breath. The older hedge fund manager, in 1A, Harrison, was sipping his sparkling water, his eyes narrowed in intense observation. "Officers," Mitchell said, his voice ringing out with heavy authority, "I apologize for wasting your time. There has been a massive miscommunication. You are to stand down immediately. The passenger in 2A is not going anywhere." The older officer frowned, clearly annoyed. "Captain, we were called for an unruly passenger refusing to leave a seat she didn't pay for." "She paid for it," Mitchell stated flatly. He turned to look at Cynthia. "She owns it." Cynthia let out a sharp, incredulous scoff, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Captain Mitchell, with all due respect, you are being manipulated. Look at her. She's wearing sweatpants. She has a printed piece of paper that she probably doctored at home. She sent a text message to some fake number to scare you. I've been flying for 25 years, and I know when someone is trying to scam their way into my cabin." Cynthia, shut your mouth," Mitchell snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. It was so loud, so uncharacteristically fierce, that Cynthia actually took a physical step backward, her jaw dropping. The pilot had never spoken to her that way in their 10 years of flying together. "You have no idea what you have just done. Do not speak another word." "You can't talk to me like that," Cynthia shrieked, her face turning crimson. "I am the purser of this aircraft. I followed protocol. She is a threat. The only threat to this airline right now is you." Maya spoke up, her voice slicing cleanly through Cynthia's hysterics. Maya slowly uncrossed her legs and leaned forward, her dark eyes pinning the flight attendant to the spot. "I warned you. I gave you every opportunity to simply do your job. You chose to let your prejudice blind you." Before Cynthia could formulate a venomous reply, the heavy, secure satellite phone mounted on the forward galley bulkhead began to ring. It wasn't the standard internal chime. It was a harsh, strident digital trill that indicated an external high-priority ground-to-air connection. Captain Mitchell walked over and picked up the heavy red handset. Captain Mitchell speaking. Captain, a deep, gravelly voice echoed through the earpiece. The voice was composed but carrying an undercurrent of barely suppressed fury that made Mitchell's blood run cold. This is David Maxwell. I assume you received the ACARS dispatch. Yes, sir, I have, Mitchell replied, unconsciously standing at attention. The police have been instructed to stand down. Your daughter is secure. Put me on speaker, David commanded, and ensure Purser Higgins is standing close enough to hear every single word. Mitchell turned toward the cabin. He flipped a toggle switch on the console, routing the satellite call through the forward public address speakers localized exclusively in the first-class section. A heavy, static-laced breath echoed through the high-end speakers above them. Every passenger in the 8 suites sat entirely paralyzed, captivated by the unfolding drama. Harrison leaned forward in Suite 1A, an amused, satisfied smirk beginning to form on his face. Am I broadcasting, Captain? David's voice boomed, rich and terrifyingly authoritative. Yes, Mr. Maxwell, you are live in the first-class cabin. Excellent, David said. Maya, sweetheart, are you unharmed? I'm fine, Dad, Maya replied calmly from her seat. A little annoyed, but physically fine. Cynthia's eyes darted frantically around the cabin. Her brain was violently rejecting reality. She looked at the phone, then at Mitchell, and finally at Maya. This is a trick, she whispered, though her voice lacked its previous ironclad conviction. This is a sick joke. Cynthia Higgins. David's voice echoed from the ceiling. The sound of her full name being spoken by the disembodied voice made her flinch. Employee identification number 44902, hired October 1999. Do you think this is a joke? Cynthia swallowed hard, her throat suddenly bone dry. Who are you? I am the man who finalized the purchase of 80% of Crown Airways' outstanding shares exactly 94 days ago through Maxwell Holdings. David stated, his tone icy and precise. I am the chairman of the board. I am your ultimate employer, and you, Ms. Higgins, have just made the worst mistake of your professional life. Silence descended upon the cabin, thick and suffocating. The reality of the situation crashed into Cynthia like a physical blow. Her knees visibly buckled, and she had to reach out to grab the edge of Suite 1A's privacy divider to keep from collapsing. Let's review the tape, shall we? David continued, his voice echoing mercilessly. 3 minutes ago, my daughter informed me that you destroyed her property. Is this accurate? Did you physically tear up a boarding pass belonging to a passenger? Sir, I thought it was fraudulent. Cynthia stammered, the arrogant, condescending purser entirely gone, replaced by a terrified woman realizing her pension was evaporating before her eyes. There are rules, company policies regarding premium cabin attire, and stop lying. David interrupted the sharpness of his tone, making the police officers wince. Do not insult my intelligence, and do not quote my company's policies to me. I wrote the new operational manual last month. Crown Airways has no dress code for paying revenue passengers. A passenger who purchases a $12,000 suite can sit in it wearing a clown suit if they so choose. The dress code applies strictly to non-revenue staff travelers. You knew this. Cynthia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was gasping for air like a fish thrown onto a dock. The gate agent Toby confirmed the ticket was valid. The scanner confirmed the ticket was valid. The passenger manifest confirmed the ticket was valid. David listed off, methodically closing every possible avenue of escape. Yet you decided to override the system, ignore the gate agent, and harass a young woman minding her own business. Why? David paused, letting the silence stretch out, forcing Cynthia to stew in it. I'll tell you why, David answered his own question. Because you looked at a young black woman in a sweatshirt, and your own deep-seated pathetic prejudices concluded she didn't belong in your cabin. You didn't see a customer. You saw an intruder. You decided to act as judge, jury, and executioner based on nothing but your own biased assumptions. Mr. Maxwell, please, Cynthia begged, tears finally welling up in her eyes. The tough exterior had completely shattered. She was trembling violently. I have given 25 years to this airline. I have an unblemished record. Please, it was a misunderstanding. I was just trying to protect the integrity of the first-class experience for the other guests. Protect? Harrison chimed in from Suite 1A, his voice loud and unapologetic. He looked directly at the speakers. Mr. Maxwell Harrison Cole here, Seat 1A. If it helps your investigation, the only person ruining the first-class experience today was this flight attendant. She was aggressive, utterly unprofessional, and honestly an embarrassment to your airline. Thank you, Mr. Cole, David replied smoothly over the speaker. Your testimony is appreciated. Cynthia buried her face in her hands, a pathetic sob escaping her lips. The walls had completely closed in. Ms. Higgins, David said, his voice dropping into a register of cold, absolute finality. Crown Airways is currently undergoing a massive restructuring. We are rooting out the rot that caused this airline to fail in the first place. That rot includes employees who treat our paying customers with disdain, racism, and unwarranted aggression. You do not represent the future of my company. Please, Cynthia whimpered. My pension. I'm 3 years from retirement. You are terminated. David pronounced the words ringing out like a gavel strike. Effectively, immediately, for cause. Your actions today constitute gross misconduct, insubordination, and a direct violation of our anti-discrimination policies. Because you are terminated for cause, all company benefits, flight privileges, and corporate severance packages are immediately revoked. A collective silent gasp rippled through the cabin. Losing 25 years of flight benefits and a padded retirement package was the ultimate nightmare for a veteran flight attendant. But we are not finished, David added smoothly. Cynthia looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines, her eyes wide with fresh panic. What else could you possibly do? You didn't just insult my daughter, David replied. You took her personal property, her physical boarding pass, and you deliberately destroyed it. Furthermore, you initiated a fraudulent security response, pulling Port Authority officers away from their actual duties to address a fabricated threat, causing a delay to this flight. David's voice shifted, addressing the 2 police officers standing awkwardly near the galley. Officers, I am speaking as the legal representative of Maxwell Holdings and Crown Airways. We wish to press formal charges against Cynthia Higgins for destruction of private property and initiating a false police report that disrupted commercial aviation operations. The older officer straightened up, looking at Cynthia. The dynamic had shifted entirely. She was no longer the complainant. She was the suspect. Understood, Mr. Maxwell. The officer said, his voice completely devoid of the sympathy he might have had 5 minutes ago. Captain Mitchell, David said, returning his attention to the pilot. You are cleared to coordinate with the gate to bring on a replacement purser. Delay the flight as long as necessary. Keep me updated. Maya, I will see you in London. I love you. Love you too, Dad, Maya said softly. The line clicked dead. The silence that followed was deafening. The reality of her termination hung heavily in the air, but the impending arrest was the final nail in Cynthia's coffin. The 2 Port Authority officers, who just moments ago had been prepared to drag Maya off the aircraft, now turned their full imposing attention onto the weeping flight attendant. Ma'am, the younger officer said, stepping forward and unhooking the handcuffs from his belt. The metallic clink was the loudest sound in the cabin. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. No, 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 Cynthia babbled, taking a frantic step backward, her high heels catching on the carpet. You can't do this. I didn't hurt anyone. It was just a piece of paper. Please, Guiders. You destroyed a passenger's property, and you filed a false report that initiated a security response on a commercial aircraft. The older officer recited gruffly, grabbing her right arm and spinning her around with practiced efficiency. That's a misdemeanor destruction charge and a federal aviation interference violation. Turn around. With a swift, fluid motion, the officer clicked the steel cuffs around Cynthia's wrists. The cold metal biting into her skin finally seemed to short-circuit her brain. She stopped fighting. Her shoulders slumped and a hollow, vacant look washed over her face. She had lost everything: her job, her pension, her dignity, and now her freedom, all within the span of 10 minutes. "Let's go," the officer commanded, nudging her toward the jet bridge. The walk of shame began. As Cynthia was marched out of the first-class cabin, she had to walk directly past Suite 2A. Maya was sitting comfortably, having opened a book she pulled from her Goyard tote. Maya didn't look up. She didn't gloat. She didn't offer a snide comment. She simply ignored Cynthia's existence completely. To Cynthia, that absolute indifference was worse than any insult. It cemented exactly how insignificant she was in Maya's world. As Cynthia passed Suite 1A, Harrison Cole raised his glass of sparkling water in a mock toast. "Safe travels, Cynthia," Harrison said smoothly, a razor-sharp smile playing on his lips. "Don't forget to check the dress code at the precinct." Cynthia squeezed her eyes shut, hot tears spilling over her cheeks as the officers guided her out of the aircraft and onto the jet bridge. Up at the gate desk, Toby, the tired young gate agent, was watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. When he saw Cynthia emerge in handcuffs escorted by the very police she had called, his jaw practically hit the floor. He remembered how aggressively she had spoken to him, how she had dismissed his confirmation of Maya's ticket. A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across Toby's face. Karma, he realized, occasionally worked with terrifying efficiency. Back on the aircraft, Captain Mitchell stood in the center of the first-class cabin. He looked visibly shaken, but thoroughly relieved that the disaster had been averted. He turned to Maya, giving her a deep, respectful nod. "Ms. Maxwell." Mitchell said, his tone apologetic and sincere. "I am profoundly sorry for what you just experienced. That behavior is not representative of this flight deck or the crew. We have a reserve purser rushing from the crew lounge right now. We should have the doors closed in about 20 minutes. "Thank you, Captain," Maya said, offering him a warm, genuine smile. "I know this wasn't your fault. You handled it perfectly once you knew the facts. I'll make sure my father knows that." Mitchell exhaled a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 10 minutes. "Thank you, ma'am. Can I get you anything while we wait?" Maya glanced down at the small side console of her suite, where the 4 torn pieces of her original boarding pass still sat a silent monument to Cynthia's arrogance. Maya brushed them into her hand and dropped them into the small waste bin. "Actually," Maya said, settling back into the plush leather seat and stretching her legs out comfortably, her Converse sneakers resting on the ottoman, "I think I'd love a glass of the 2008 Dom Perignon." 15 minutes later, a breathless, highly professional new purser arrived, treating every single passenger in the cabin with impeccable grace and equality. The heavy aircraft doors were sealed, the jet bridge pulled away, and Crown Airways Flight 802 began its heavy pushback from the gate. As the massive Boeing 777 roared down the runway, ascending through the dark rain clouds and breaking into the brilliant, blinding sunshine above, Maya sipped her champagne. Down below, deep within the fluorescent-lit holding cells of JFK's Port Authority Police Precinct, Cynthia Higgins sat in her ruined uniform, staring at the concrete wall, realizing that the price of arrogance was everything she had ever worked for. The storm had passed, leaving behind nothing but clear skies and the quiet, undeniable power of unchecked karma. Cold, unyielding concrete replaced the plush walnut and leather of the Boeing 777. The holding cells beneath John F. Kennedy International Airport were a bleak, windowless purgatory that smelled faintly of industrial bleach and stale sweat. For Cynthia Higgins, the transition from the unchallenged queen of the skies to a detained suspect in a holding cell had taken less than an hour. She sat on a rigid metal bench, her perfectly tailored Crown Airways blazer crumpled beside her, the gold purser wings stripped from her lapel by the booking officer as a safety precaution. Her wrists throbbed. The ghost of the cold steel handcuffs still bit into her skin. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the calm, entirely unbothered face of Maya Maxwell, followed instantly by the terrifying disembodied voice of David Maxwell echoing through the cabin speakers. "You are terminated, effectively immediately, for cause." Those words cycled through her mind like a corrupted audio file. In the aviation industry, being fired for cause was a death sentence. It meant the immediate forfeiture of her severance package, the freezing of unvested company stock options she had accumulated over 2 decades, and the permanent revocation of her Z-fare flight privileges. But the financial ruin was only the beginning. The heavy steel door of the precinct interview room clattered open. A woman in a sharp navy pantsuit walked in carrying a thin manila folder. It was Brenda Carmichael, the regional representative for the Association of Professional Flight Attendants. Cynthia let out a ragged gasp of relief springing up from the metal bench. "Brenda." "Oh, thank God!" Cynthia cried, rushing toward the table. "You have to fix this. They can't do this to me. Captain Mitchell threw me under the bus and this passenger—" "Sit down, Cynthia," Brenda commanded. Her voice was entirely devoid of the usual sisterly solidarity union reps projected. It was flat, clinical, and exhausted. Cynthia froze the tone, hitting her like a splash of ice water. She slowly sank back into her plastic chair. Brenda opened the folder, spreading a few printed documents on the scratched table. "I just got off the phone with Crown Airways Corporate Legal Counsel, and I've reviewed the preliminary report filed by Port Authority Police. I'm going to be very direct with you because you are in a catastrophic amount of trouble. The union has to file a grievance." Cynthia insisted, her voice trembling but defensive. "I followed protocol for a suspected fraudulent boarding pass. I have 25 years of seniority." "Seniority doesn't protect you from criminal charges," Brenda snapped, tapping a manicured finger against the police report. "You didn't follow protocol, Cynthia. Protocol is calling the gate agent to verify the ticket. Protocol is bringing the issue to the captain's attention before destroying a passenger's property. You bypassed all operational guidelines because you made a subjective biased judgment based on a passenger's appearance. You ripped up a $12,000 revenue ticket. And worse, you initiated a Code 3 security threat over a bruised ego." "She was wearing sweatpants." Cynthia pleaded, tears welling up again. She didn't look like she belonged there. Brenda stared at her, a look of profound disgust crossing her features. "Do you have any idea who that girl is? She is Maya Maxwell. Her father's holding company literally signed the checks that kept this airline out of Chapter 11 bankruptcy 3 months ago. And even if she was just a college kid who saved up for a luxury ticket, your behavior was a gross violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. You profiled a black passenger, humiliated her, and then tried to have her arrested to cover your mistake." Cynthia buried her face in her hands. "What is the union going to do?" "Nothing," Brenda said softly, closing the folder. The word hung in the sterile air, heavy and final. "We cannot and will not defend a termination for gross misconduct and malicious property destruction. The airline has the cockpit voice recorder audio of you lying to the captain, and they have statements from 6 other first-class passengers, including a billionaire hedge fund manager, all testifying to your aggressive and discriminatory behavior." Brenda stood up, looking down at the broken woman. "You are officially unrepresented by the APFA. You need to call a private criminal defense attorney. The Federal Aviation Administration has already been notified of the false security report. They will be pursuing civil penalties for interfering with the duties of a flight crew. Good luck, Cynthia." As the heavy door clicked shut behind the union rep, the true weight of the situation finally crushed the last remnants of Cynthia's denial. She was completely alone. No union, no job, no pension, just the cold walls of a holding cell and the terrifying reality that her unchecked arrogance had finally summoned a storm she could not survive. While Cynthia's world was crumbling in a windowless room in Queens, Maya Maxwell was stepping off a private helicopter onto the rooftop helipad of a towering glass skyscraper in Canary Wharf, London. The rain of New York had been replaced by a crisp, clear British evening. David Maxwell stood near the edge of the landing pad, his dark wool overcoat catching the wind. At 55, David possessed a commanding presence that naturally forced boardrooms into silence. He was a man who built empires by identifying inefficiencies and ruthlessly excising them. When Maya stepped out of the helicopter, his stern face broke into a warm, deeply relieved smile. He pulled his daughter into a tight embrace. "Are you okay?" David asked, stepping back to look her in the eye. Maya smiled, smoothing down her Yale hoodie. "I'm perfectly fine, Dad. A little jet-lagged, but fine. Honestly, I think the hedge fund guy in 1A was more traumatized by the shouting than I was." David let out a dark, humorless chuckle. "Harrison Cole. I owe him a bottle of scotch for speaking up. Come on, the executive board has been waiting for 45 minutes. It's time to do some housekeeping." The executive boardroom of Crown Airways European headquarters was a masterclass in intimidating corporate architecture. A massive 20-foot slab of polished black marble served as the conference table, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the River Thames. Around the table sat the 12 most powerful people in the airline: the chief financial officer, the head of global operations, the director of human resources, and several key investors. When David Maxwell entered the room with Maya walking quietly behind him, the low murmur of conversation instantly died. Every executive sat up straighter. David didn't take his usual seat at the head of the table. Instead, he paced slowly down the side, his eyes scanning the nervous faces of his leadership team. Maya took a seat in a leather chair against the wall, opening her laptop. "Ladies and gentlemen," David began, his voice low but carrying effortlessly across the vast room. "When Maxwell Holdings acquired a controlling stake in Crown Airways, I was told that our primary issues were aging aircraft and inefficient fuel hedging. I was told that our customer service was the gold standard of the industry." He paused, stopping behind the chair of Margaret Lynn, the global head of HR. 3 hours ago, David continued, "My daughter Maya boarded Flight 802 out of JFK. She was a fully ticketed revenue passenger in first class. Before the aircraft even pushed back from the gate, a 25-year veteran purser harassed her, accused her of fraud based entirely on her race and attire, physically destroyed her boarding pass, and called armed police to drag her off the plane." A collective horrified gasp rippled through the boardroom. The CFO, an older British man named Jonathan, turned pale. "Mr. Maxwell, we had no idea. This is an unprecedented failure of protocol." "It is not unprecedented, Jonathan." David snapped, his voice suddenly rising in volume, cracking like a whip. "That is the problem. Maya project the data." Maya tapped a few keys on her laptop. The massive smart glass wall at the end of the room instantly transformed into a high-definition display showing a complex series of graphs and spreadsheets. While I was in the air, Maya spoke up, her voice calm and authoritative, holding the attention of a dozen seasoned executives. "I accessed the airline's internal grievance database. Cynthia Higgins, the flight attendant in question, has had 14 separate passenger complaints filed against her in the last 5 years. 12 of those complaints were from passengers of color alleging discriminatory treatment, hostile tones, and unwarranted ID checks in premium cabins." Maya highlighted a red column on the screen. "Every single one of these complaints was flagged by lower-level management, sent to HR, and subsequently dismissed with a written warning, because she had seniority and the union made it difficult to fire her." David stepped to the head of the table, placing both hands flat on the black marble. He leaned forward, looking directly at Margaret Lynn. "Margaret, you protect the company, but by protecting toxic employees to avoid union friction, you've exposed this airline to a catastrophic PR nightmare and a massive civil rights lawsuit. If Maya had been a regular civilian, she would have been humiliated, arrested, and traumatized. How many other passengers have we done this to?" Margaret swallowed hard, unable to meet his gaze. "Mr. Maxwell, the union arbitration process." "The union does not run my airline," David interrupted coldly. "I do. Effective immediately, we are initiating a complete overhaul of our customer relations and staff retention policies. Any frontline employee with more than 3 verified complaints of discriminatory behavior is to be placed on immediate unpaid administrative leave, pending a ruthless internal investigation. If the union strikes, let them strike. I would rather ground the entire fleet for a month than fly one more plane under a banner that tolerates racism. He looked around the room, ensuring every single executive understood the new reality. Furthermore, David announced, gesturing to Maya. Maya is stepping in as a special consultant to the board. She will be leading a task force alongside external civil rights auditors to rewrite our de-escalation protocols and premium cabin training. We are no longer an airline that judges our passengers by the labels on their clothing or the color of their skin. If any of you have a problem with this new direction, I suggest you leave your key cards on the table and walk out right now. Nobody moved. The silence in the room was absolute heavy with the realization that the old boys club of sweeping dirt under the rug was officially dead. The Higgins incident hadn't just cost one woman her job, it had sparked a corporate wildfire that was about to burn the rot out of the entire company. Justice moves deliberately, but when it finally arrives, its weight is crushing. 6 months after the catastrophic events aboard Flight 802, Cynthia Higgins found herself standing before a federal judge in the Eastern District of New York. The courtroom was a cavernous space of dark mahogany and austere lighting, offering absolutely none of the comforting luxury she had once associated with her professional life. Her appearance had undergone a shocking transformation. The impeccably styled, arrogant purser was gone. In her place stood a visibly aged woman in a cheap off-the-rack gray blazer, her shoulders slumped under the immense pressure of public disgrace and financial ruin. Because her termination from Crown Airways was classified as for cause, the fallout had been absolute. She had lost her health insurance, her heavily subsidized travel privileges, and her unvested stock options. To afford a competent defense attorney since the flight attendants union had unequivocally abandoned her, she had been forced to liquidate her retirement savings, paying exorbitant early withdrawal penalties that decimated her nest egg. Ms. Higgins, the Honorable Judge Robert Kalman intoned, peering down at her from the high bench. His voice was completely devoid of sympathy, echoing sharply in the quiet room. The commercial aviation system relies heavily on the professionalism, integrity, and sound judgment of its flight crews. You abused your authority to weaponize airport security protocols against a paying passenger, entirely motivated by baseless discriminatory prejudice. In doing so, you disrupted a major international flight and wasted vital emergency resources. Cynthia kept her gaze fixed on the scuffed wooden floor, a hot tear leaking from the corner of her eye. She couldn't bring herself to look at the gallery where a representative from Crown Airways' corporate legal team sat silently taking notes. Pursuant to your guilty plea regarding the misdemeanor destruction of property and your settlement with the Federal Aviation Administration, Judge Kalman continued, his gavel resting ominously in his hand, I am sentencing you to 300 hours of community service. Furthermore, you will pay a civil penalty of $45,000. Finally, per the FAA's mandate, you are permanently placed on the Federal Aviation Restricted Employment List. You will never hold a position with any commercial airline operating in the United States ever again. The gavel slammed down with a sharp, resonant crack. To Cynthia, it sounded exactly like the heavy metallic thud of a first-class suite door slamming shut, locking her out of the skies forever. 2 grueling years passed. The Port Authority bus terminal in Midtown Manhattan is a sprawling, chaotic labyrinth of concrete, steel, and neon. It is a vital artery of transit, but it possesses absolutely none of the romance, prestige, or pristine cleanliness of international aviation. The air perpetually smells of diesel exhaust, stale pretzels, and damp coats. It is a place where people rush through heads down, desperate to reach their destinations rather than enjoy the journey. Maya Maxwell, now 24 and officially holding the title of Vice President of Passenger Experience at Crown Airways, navigated the crowded concourse with effortless grace. She wasn't there to catch a discount bus to New Jersey. Following her successful restructuring of the airline's premium cabin training protocols alongside her father, Maya had been tasked with leading a multi-million-dollar logistical study. Her objective was to overhaul Crown Airways' regional ground shuttle services, creating a seamless connection between smaller domestic hubs and major international airports. Dressed in a sharp-tailored navy pantsuit with her hair pulled back into a sleek professional bun, Maya moved with a quiet, undeniable authority. A small team of logistics analysts and transit architects trailed slightly behind her, murmuring notes into tablets and snapping photos of the terminal's infrastructure. They approached Gate 62, situated in the deepest, most poorly lit section of the lower concourse. A massive line of weary, rain-soaked travelers was slowly shuffling onto a battered regional bus bound for Scranton. The boarding process was loud, disorganized, and thoroughly miserable. At the front of the line, a woman wearing a garish, ill-fitting neon yellow safety vest was mechanically scanning crinkled paper tickets with a handheld barcode reader. The woman looked utterly depleted. Her face was lined with deep, bitter creases, and her movements were robotic, completely devoid of any spark or passion. "Have your tickets out and ready!" The woman barked roughly, her voice raspy and exhausted. She snatched a wet boarding pass from a teenager, scanned it with a harsh electronic beep, and shoved it back. "Move down the aisle. Keep it moving." Maya abruptly stopped walking. Her small entourage of executives stumbled slightly behind her, confused by the sudden halt. Maya narrowed her eyes, peering through the harsh, unforgiving glare of the terminal's fluorescent lights. Beneath the cheap neon vest and the deeply etched lines of regret, there was no mistaking her. It was Cynthia Higgins. The sheer magnitude of the karma was staggering. The woman who had once arrogantly ruled the skies, who had sneered at Maya from the pedestal of a $12,000 first-class suite, who had ripped up a boarding pass because she felt a passenger was beneath her, was now spending her days scanning $10 bus tickets in a drafty, exhaust-filled terminal. She was making a fraction of her old salary, stripped of all prestige, authority, and respect, relegated to the absolute bottom rung of the mass transit industry. Maya didn't feel a sudden vindictive thrill. She didn't feel the urge to walk over, flash her vice president badge, and rub salt in the wound. She simply felt a profound, grounding sense of closure. Actions always have consequences. Arrogance builds a fragile glass house, and prejudice is the heavy stone that inevitably shatters it to pieces. As Maya stood silently on the concourse, Cynthia happened to look up from her scanner to address the next passenger in line. Her tired, hollow eyes swept across the crowd and unexpectedly locked directly onto Maya. For 3 agonizing seconds, the chaotic noise of the bus terminal seemed to completely evaporate. Cynthia's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated shock. A hot, visceral flush of deep shame crept up her neck, staining her pale cheeks a dark crimson. She looked down at her own cheap neon vest, then back up at Maya's impeccable designer suit and the team of executives hanging on her every word. In that brief, silent exchange of glances, the entire devastating history of their encounter played out all over again. Cynthia knew that Maya saw exactly how far she had fallen. Maya did not smile. She did not glare. She simply offered Cynthia a slow, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, a quiet confirmation that the scales of justice had indeed balanced themselves perfectly. Without another word, Maya turned her back seamlessly, rejoining her team. "Is everything all right, Ms. Maxwell?" one of the lead analysts asked, noticing her brief distraction. "Everything is perfectly fine." "Arthur." Maya said, her voice bright-focused and entirely unbothered, leaving the shadows of the bus terminal behind her forever. "Let's move on to the upper-level expansion plans. We have a lot of great work to do." As Maya walked away, the confident click of her heels echoing over the terminal noise, Cynthia Higgins swallowed the bitter lump in her throat, raised her scanner, and went back to checking cheap paper tickets, permanently grounded by the heavy weight of her own prejudice. And there it is, the ultimate reality check. This story isn't just a dramatic tale. It is a direct reflection of real events that have shaken the aviation and corporate worlds. In an age where everyone has a camera and corporate accountability is higher than ever, the days of toxic employees hiding behind union seniority to bully passengers are coming to an end. Unchecked arrogance will always meet its match, and karma doesn't just knock, it breaks down the door. If this story gave you the chills or made you cheer for Maya's quiet, devastating victory, I need you to smash that like button right now. Have you ever witnessed wild karma play out in real life? Tell me your craziest stories in the comments below. I'm reading every single one. Don't forget to share this video with someone who loves a satisfying revenge story and hit that subscribe button with the notification bell turned on so you never miss out on the next dramatic true-to-life saga. Stay humble out there, and I will see you in the next video.